Catalyst for Network Asset Management, and that's John Brooks and Anthony Carter.
All right, good. Okay, so thank you very much for attending. I wanted to give you a quick rundown on the network capital asset management catalyst that we're doing upstairs at section 2.3. This particular catalyst was originally conceived through the work of the TM Forum Asset Management Group. The team had, for a long time, dealt with asset management from a TM Forum perspective, focused on assets across the entire business. And what we did in the last year, the last 6 months especially, is we have turned the focus of the team more towards an area that's much more near and dear to capital, CapEx expenditure, and so on within the industry. So, and that's been to turn the focus more towards the network-facing side of the business. Within the team, we started to identify the different problems that exist in the CapEx and OpEx world of network budgeting and network optimization as we understood it, and we got together with several operators around the world and discussed these issues with them to go through and make sure that we had a good understanding so that we could formulate some standards and some solution recommendations within the team itself. So some of the things that we've discovered, and a lot of this is founded off of things like the PwC report that a lot of the results are displayed here on screen, where we discovered that in reality, today 20% of the assets that you have invested in your network are not returning the cost of capital that they're originally, that has been borrowed against to fund them in the first place. There's a great deal of inefficiency in allocating that capital. Noticing all the different figures across here, 64% of the operators that were talked to basically said that the CapEx planning is driven by technology, but it's not necessarily driven by any form of business objective, nor is there any circle back to make sure those objectives for the original purchasing were ever met in the first place. 50% lacked sufficient accountability and incentives on the return on those assets. There's a myriad of different issues that we uncovered within this report that were very, very telling towards that network capital asset management space and the problems that occur. 30% of the new projects that are initiated by the business really don't benefit from any lessons learned from prior projects initiated within that business for CapEx expenditure and so on. 19% of the operators that we talked to had extensive paperwork and not enough insights into why they were spending money in the network, where they were spending money, anything supporting a lot of that activity. Across the bottom, what we had also discovered, and it was revealed in this PwC report, is network capital right now within the industry is a huge chunk of money. Network CapEx is a massive chunk of money. $355 billion is what the projected annual spend is going to be per year. So when you look at the amount of money that's being recovered in other assurance operations within the business, such as revenue assurance, such as fraud management, such as cost management, all those different activities that are taking place in the business right now, the amount of money that they have available to them to recover or save or preserve for the business really pales in comparison to what we see in this whole network capital space. We're talking about $355 billion being collectively spent across operators. Several of the operators that are tier ones in just North America alone are in upwards of $14 to $16 billion per annum spends in network capital. So our ability within the team to put in an asset management catalyst and some measures in here to help optimize the networks and the capital being spent, making a 1 to 5% impact inside of those budgets is going to start talking into the hundreds of millions of dollars very, very rapidly. So it's big money that we're talking about. 5 to 15% of the assets that we discover in network, and this isn't necessarily from that PwC report, but it's from a lot of our experiences, 5 to 15% of these assets that we see in networks today are actually stranded, unutilized, or underutilized. We have other figures that are more financially oriented. We look at 9% being the typical average cost of capital, and the fact that assets are only returning to the 6%, or that the average return on investment for assets sits in the 6% range. That there's a significant problem going on here, and this very last bullet here that the highlighter works great over here. It doesn't work well over here. This very last box really starts to point out the direction that the industry is facing and where this problem is going. When you're talking about EBITDA margins that are going from, you know, in the mid-30s down to the 15s, margins are shrinking. CapEx is becoming a very, very critical and important thing that the business is needing to think about now on a regular basis. I was with an operator in a developing part of the world not too long ago. Their margins had shrunk down to under 5% in the last 5 years. It's getting that tight. And they were in the 20% range at the start of this. So this is a significant problem. So where are the places that we can make an impact? It's in that network capital space. So what we did within the team to start to make an impact in network capital asset management is to take a look at the entire asset lifecycle and determine where there are discrepancies that exist. So looking across an asset lifecycle from when you're actually originally budgeting and forecasting the need for equipment and planning, and then purchasing that equipment and receiving that equipment, and continuing through the life cycle to when you deploy that equipment, you actually provision and operate that equipment towards making money for the business. And then you eventually redeploy or retire that equipment. That's the life cycle across these assets. Notice the break in the middle. The finance side of the organization typically has good visibility of those assets in the front part of that life cycle. The back half of that life cycle is when you're going to typically see your network operations, network planning, network teams in general have visibility. The front part of that life cycle, you're planning, you're budgeting, you're ordering, it's showing up in your ERP platforms. As soon as you get to the back half of this, now you're starting to see that equipment show up at inventory. And we're conducting a survey right now that I'm happy to provide any of you all with a link where we actually have paper copies of it upstairs at the Catalyst to get a feel for CapEx management, network CapEx practices within your particular operations. It is anonymous, but we are putting those results collectively together. We'll be publishing the results later this year to see what the practices look like across operators. Across this side of the business, where the technical side of the house, the CTO's organization has great visibility, so they hope into inventory, into where their assets are located on the network, and so on. Both sides of the business have this gap that exists right now. They don't fully understand what's happening across that entire life cycle. So as a team, we recognize that we need to find a way to bridge that and give them a unified view across the entire business. So lack of available data and analytics for budget planning is something that still becomes a pretty significant problem within finance, and lack of controls and metrics to improve how that capital is being used once it's actually budgeted, approved, and spent by the operations side. Those are two very, very significant areas that led to where we are today in the Catalyst. So looking at one more slide here to talk a little bit about the industry problem. We looked at some of the network CapEx, what we call the conundrum, or the one of the challenges it's facing here. First of all, looking at visibility and insights. From that perspective, there's a lack of a complete view of your assets today, of your network assets. What stages those assets are in? Are they in the warehouse? Are they deployed? Are they retired? Are they out for repair? Are they in transit? Are they lost? We have many, many use cases that we've discovered where assets have transited the network, going to multiple locations, being deployed in multiple sites. Sometimes they just disappear and they get lost. But during that movement around, some of those multiple site transits happen in short periods of time, in which there's really not a lot of logic why they moved to 3 central offices in 8 days. There's just not a case that helps justify something like that. We have other cases where warehouses are stocking parts for assets in which the parts that those warehouses support don't even exist out in the network. Why are you putting a whole bunch of gear from Cisco into this office or into this warehouse that serves this region of 50 central offices when in fact you have absolutely no Cisco equipment of that make or model deployed in any of those COs? Why are you stocking spare parts in those warehouses? We found those kind of use cases. We found other use cases where we have upwards of 8 or 9 figures literally of parts that are thought by ERP to be deployed in the network. The network has them nowhere to be found, and they're just lost. To this day, those parts have never been found because there wasn't that visibility and that continuity that connected across that entire life cycle. So this is a much, much bigger problem. From the outside looking in, you think that this would be relatively under control with all the systems in place today. In fact, it's not. looking across the accurate, complete, and trusted data gets to what I was just talking about. Can you actually trust your data quality? Can you really trust that what you have a report from an inventory is truly what's happening? Can you trust that the information coming out of ERP is truly what's happening? Accountability, when you look across accountability and talk about who's responsible for CapEx control across the life cycle, the general answer to that has been the finance organization. The problem is, once that part starts to be deployed into the network, finance no longer has any visibility into that part's disposition. So how can they control that CapEx component? And depending on which organization you talk to, they'll say it's finance or they'll say it's network, and there's a little bit of discrepancy again that's taking place. But the bottom line is there's no continuity of information. There's no one place where that single view exists. And also in purchase controls. Right now, where do we have in the business controls to go through and throttle how much we're spending, where and when and why? That's something that doesn't necessarily exist in most of the businesses today. For us to go through and say we've deployed a great deal of equipment into a particular region for a build project, only to find out that only 3/4 of that equipment is actually being utilized to the full optimized plan capabilities, but we forgot about it. We went to a whole other region, did a whole other project, and bought a whole new set of equipment. And all this time, 25% of what we had left over from the last project that was lit up, not even provisioned, just lit up and burning power in the network and not generating a dime of revenue, is still doing that, and you've gone out and bought that equipment all over again in a whole other place. This is actually a pretty common problem, especially in the larger operators. So what do some of the things, what are some of the questions out there that we uncovered that the operators are saying they need to know? From a CFO perspective, when are assets actually generating revenue? How do you get a network-wide view of everything that's going on and optimize all of that to make sure that you're actually using the capital that the CFO office has actually authorized to its fullest potential? What, where, when, why, how? When do you need to buy? How much do you need to buy? At what point do you need to target those purchases? Where are some of your stranded assets today? Do you really even know? Can you offset some of that network spend, as we were just talking about with some of those purchase controls? How do you deal with some of the audit and regulatory compliances when they want to know what you have out there, how you're depreciating it, where it exists today, how much revenue it's generating? Can you answer any of those questions with any degree of accuracy? General answer is typically not. Are deployed assets, from the CTO side of the house, are they deployed appropriately or located appropriately? Are they all known? How do we manage decommissioning? It's interesting when you look at decommissioning of parts of your network. This happens in transformations all the time. When you go through and you retire assets off of your network, and those assets have a certain value out there on a resale market, or to the business in general, do you know how quickly you're pulling those assets down and recouping that free cash in the business? Do you have a plan in place that understands that while you're decommissioning in this region, your other 30 areas that you're going to be decommissioning in that plan are still purchasing new parts of that exact same set of equipment, when you should be rehoming some of that equipment from your teardown sites? Do you have any analytics that help you get to that point and balance that out? The answer again is typically no. How do you calculate time to value? When you go through and look at what you've actually purchased and you've received, and you go to light it up and deploy it, and then you actually go through and have it be provisioned and operating. Those are all incremental pieces that have time to value components. From when you actually receive an asset, should it be generating money for the business? Right now, that's not being very accurately measured. And are all assets carrying services? Again, use cases that we've talked about where we have cases where the assets are out there today generating or burning power, lit up, may not be provisioned with a single service, burning a lot of power, not generating any revenue for the company whatsoever, or they're under provision, so they're not generating all that they're capable of generating. And how do you generate your network capital budget proposals? You'd be surprised how many operators we talk to when you get deep into the CTO organization and you talk about how somebody in planning or somebody that just manages the warehouse says how many things they need. A lot of times it's a thumb in the air. I think I need that shelf to look more full. I need 77 of those parts this year. Why? Because I used 40 last year and I want to have 77 always on hand. So I need to buy that many more. Does it make sense? What's that based on besides gut feel? So what we're doing with all of that background in mind, what we're doing in this catalyst is, as a team, we've identified about 9 use cases. We're highlighting 5 of them across the middle here within this catalyst today. So we're looking at 2 different angles. We're taking the entire life cycle and we're aligning that with several data sources across the business. And all of that information is populating into these use cases. So the first use case is this procurement gating, where we're going through and showing how we can actually load in and tie into purchasing pipeline systems. See exactly what parts lists are going to order, and then go out and scan the network in the warehouses for either stranded or unutilized or able to be rehomed assets. And at that point, we can show immediate deferral of CapEx. And some of that deferral, when you're talking about 15 cards that cost $100,000 a piece, you just saved $1.5 million that quick. And it's all based on analytics. So there's a very important part that enables procurement gating in all of these use cases, and that's this network systems data source down here. Within the catalyst, we have technology that's able to go out and do that discovery. So we can discover all the pieces of that network from a physical, logical, and service level perspective, and we can also discover capacity metrics as well. So, I'm running through with time. Okay. By understanding that network, that's a hallmark foundation piece. If you can't fully understand your network and discover it on a regular basis, nothing in asset management is going to be as accurate as it would need to be. You have to be able to discover accurately all of those different facets of the network. So we've brought that technology in to help balance this out, because that gives us a good look and feel of what I've been referring to as the breathing, the pulse rate of the network. Parts are coming in, parts are coming out, parts are failing, there's growth taking place, all the different things are happening to change that network on a regular, daily basis. Through that discovery, we know it. And we can use those analytics then to determine what we actually need to buy, and when we need to buy it, how much, and where we need to put it. This time to value use case in the middle is looking at, again, time to value from when you receive it, to you deploy it, to you provision it. At that point, you start actually making money back on that asset. This is down to an individual part classification number, so the operator can put SLAs on each individual asset and say, if it's not returning power within a certain, or money within a certain period of time, we need to know about it. The capacity management use case is doing capacity a different way than it's been typically done in the past. What we've been experiencing with our conversations with operators is that capacity has been based off of network traffic planning data, primarily. Usage data, for a very simple way to put it. And historically, they've not been accurate in their planning as a result of that. So we teamed with some operators and developed a new way of doing capacity planning, or capacity management, by looking at not just the traffic data, the traffic that the volume that that equipment was carrying, but we also then blended in a lighter touch discovery that went out and actually talked to those assets, and talked to memory, talk to CPU, talk to connected users, talk to VLANs that were provisioned, talk to all the things that were consumable resources inside of those assets, and modeled that in analytics. And blended that with the traffic, and now we had a far, far more accurate capacity view than we've ever had before. So that's the third use case. The fourth use case is around asset tracking and geolocation, to where we actually not just go out and discover where the assets are, but we watch how they move around. We watch when they disappear. We have tracking of every discoverable part in the network. We know where it's at, when it's moving. We should know why it's moving. If things are bouncing around, we even have flags when they start to move a little too frequently between offices. We have alerts that can be sent out through the Catalyst as well, to let people know that, hey, you've got cards that are kind of moving around different central offices. And we have actual customer use cases where that's the case, and the customer did not know that their assets were marching around central offices days apart from each other. So this last use case that we're demonstrating is on decommission management. And the idea with decommission management is we wanted to go through and say, when you tear down a site, We want to make sure that all the parts that are needed back in the central office or back in the warehouse for resale make it there in the right amount of time so that we still get as much value out of them as we can. And the parts that need to be reharvested and sent to other parts of the network to keep the operations from spending money on more of those parts until they are finally decommissioned. We want to put a stop to that. So we want to go through the analytics again. By discovering the network, we can understand the rate of consumption of all those different warehouses in that entire network. And through understanding that rate of consumption, we know what they're going to need and not buy, so that we can go through and rehome parts and then bring the other parts that are available to resell back, and that maximizes operator free cash. So this is the catalyst, the way that we've set it up here today. As far as how it links to frameworks, and I'll bounce back to this slide in just a moment, but I did want to touch on real quick what we do within this team. Our current charter is actually going through and doing this catalyst and that industry survey to get a quantification of just how big this industry problem is. Because so far with every operator we've talked to, it's pretty significant. What we want to do within our fall charter within the team is now connect some standards and link them back into frameworks, because today we link to strategy and infrastructure, enterprise management, and operation, all within the frameworks model. So we want to be able to bring that entire piece back and rope that into a set of standards that we'll create for network capital asset management and network optimization that we want to release sometime most likely in early 2015. So with that, I can bounce to whatever slide we need here. I want to thank you for your time. I do want to quickly introduce Anthony Carter. He is the CPO for EcoNet Wireless. He is our operator champion that's here with us today. And that's why I think if you have anything to add.
I think maybe just really to confirm what John is saying. I know many of you are operators. I've been sort of CEO position in operations, and one of the biggest challenges we often find is trying to get finance networks and increasingly now the commercial guys to actually agree on something. And I think one of the values that we see of a tool like this is that we can actually have data that is accurate and robust and is common, so everyone can actually look at the reality rather than very often their own particular agendas, which I think everyone has these days. And increasingly, I've said to these guys, I think the straight line is more a circle, because there is an increasing iteration around knowing what's happening in the network, and budgeting and planning needs to happen more frequently. Things are changing so quickly these days that we've got to be in a position to respond or anticipate those changes as quickly as we can, and where possible redeploy or bring to bear additional capacity and use it. I think, as John said, we're seeing this. Margins are under huge pressure. We can't allow traffic to slip away because we don't have the capacity in the right place. So for us, it's certainly as a customer potential, as an operator, it provides a really good platform for us to start to answer some of those questions.
All right. Any questions? And again, I encourage any of you that have any network background within your operations at all, please stop by up at the center section up there in the hub in the Catalyst area. We're at 2.3. We're kind of in the back corner. You'll know us because it's really warm back there. They have a lot of lights back there, and we're right in the middle of them. But we have a survey up there, and it is in a hard copy form that it'll take 5 minutes of your time. But it gives us, it's totally anonymous, and it gives us a view of how your network operations and your capital management policies are in place. We're putting all of those together anonymously. We're just looking at it by region, and then we'll be publishing the results later on this year.